Hello. Thank you to everyone tuning in today on today's episode of What's New in Data. Very excited about our guest today. We have John K. Thompson. John, how are you doing today?
I'm awesome, man. I'm really having a great day. How are you, John?
Likewise. This is my second pod of the day. I was just appearing on someone else's pod today, Lauren Ballack and Mary's show, Tech Bros, which is fun. But now I get to be on the other side and have you on the What's New in Data podcast. So super excited about that. So, John, you're the author of Causal Artificial Intelligence. Super popular book. It's back ordered on Amazon. It's just been a huge craze. But first, tell the listeners a bit about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. I just absolutely love data and analytics. I've been doing this for 37 years now, and when I talk to people, they're like, "Well, hey, what are you thinking about the next phase?" I'm like, "Another book, more innovation, data analytics, just going for it." And a lot of people are like, "Wow, dude, you're way over the top on this." But it's what I really enjoy doing. I've been doing it for decades. I started out as an assembler programmer way back when, building systems for large corporations, and I kind of thought, what's the point? I really felt even way back when the data was the source of the center of everything, and analyzing data and understanding data was the place to be. So I spent my career doing that. I worked at IBM when we wrote the first neural network utility. I ran the advanced analytics division of Dell. In the last 4.5 years, I ran the AI group of CSL Behring, which is the second largest biopharmaceutical company in the world. So my career has been split into two halves. I've either been building the technology that we've used for analytics and data mining and artificial intelligence, or I've been on the other side of being a practitioner. So, a lot of people are like, why did you do that? Why didn't you just stay on one side or the other? And I really love innovation. I love building software, but I really felt that if I couldn't actually do it, myself, then I was kind of a poser. So, I really wanted to be able to make a difference in using the technology and the data and making businesses more efficient and effective.
Excellent. And I think having the practitioner's perspective on top of everything just adds so much knowledge, and being in the weeds of things is so much different than simply talking about stuff, which is why your book is so popular and has a real boots on the ground perspective along with the market facing futuristic lens on it. So that's a super exciting frontier for you.
Yeah, it really is. It was one of those things that I've always been looking forward. I've always been trying to think of what is the next thing, where can we get to, and causal AI just really seemed to be a topic that was coming. That it's going to arrive, and when we started talking to the publisher, Wiley published this book, and we were talking to the acquisition editor and bringing up causal AI. There was a lot of skepticism in the dialogue. They were taking the position that, hey, this is a research thing, this is an academic thing, people are just dabbling in it. And I said, look, by the time we write the book and we get it edited, we get it published and printed, we're gonna be on the cusp of this thing. So luckily they agreed and went with it. So here we are with a brand new exciting book in the market.
Absolutely. Tell the listeners the story behind writing this book.
Sure, absolutely. It's one of those things that I always go back. We always think of ourselves as earlier phases in our career, different personas. I think of myself as a lapsed product manager. So I always look at things through the lens of what a product looks like. But even earlier than that, my father had an auto repair shop, and he always had me go to work early in the morning. I mean, really early in the morning before school, and then I go home and clean up, and I go to school, and then I come home and work more. So that kind of set me on a certain path in my life. So I always get up very early in the morning, sometimes 3, 4 in the morning, and I write early in the morning before my start my day job. So sounds kind of airy fairy and a little odd, but I think about what I want to write just before I go to bed. It's the last thing I think of. So I think that I'm writing while I'm sleeping. So what I do is I get up in the morning and I channel what I've written. So that's the writing process. That's how I do it. But the idea for causal AI came to me because I really felt that there was more to AI than what we were seeing. We started writing this book before generative AI exploded, and I've been doing traditional AI for multiple decades. So I really felt the why, understanding why things happen, why people did what they do, and why processes unfold the way they do, and what were the real causal activities that led to the results that we see. So it was a product of my curiosity, and my co-author Judith Hurwitz and I were talking, and she said, we really should write this book. And I said, God, this is funny. I've been thinking about this for a while. So we just jumped into it and did it.
That's amazing, and it's so interesting to hear how your life and your upbringing, waking up very early, played a part in you having this time to yourself in the mornings where you could sort of meditate and just write about things you see at a very high level. Because I notice as well in my day job, once that 9 to 5 starts, those slacks are firing, the emails are firing, you got everything on your calendar. You can't think clearly, right? You're just
No.
going from thing to thing, right? So having that extra time to just sit, meditate, write, and you really were able to look into the future, right? As you were mentioning, even your publisher was saying, this causal artificial intelligence seems so pie in the sky. Does anyone do AI? But now
Yeah.
look at us here in 2023, where you have to have AI on your short-term roadmap, not just your 3 year, 5 year roadmap. We recently had a panel, What's New in Data, live in San Francisco with Bruno Aziza from Capital G and Sanji Mohan, a Gartner background. And that was the question, like, should people be looking at AI in the future or now? And the consensus is data teams have to do it now, or someone else is going to be brought in to do it. And that
That's right.
person who comes in, where do they have to get the data to do AI? You, the data
From
team.
you. Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. So it's extremely critical, which is why your book is almost perfect timing. And I wanted to ask you another question. So in your words, there's 3 pillars of artificial intelligence. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. Yeah. We really are coming to, a almost a portfolio approach to artificial intelligence. The traditional classical artificial intelligence, neural networks, clustering, classification, all those things that we've done for for many, many years, that we're able to predict what will happen. How many people will come to the store? What is the right price? These kind of things. Generative AI is now giving us the ability to generate really quickly different ways to how to respond to people. All right, we want to respond to you know, a teenage girl, or we want to respond to a senior citizen. Generative AI is very good at generating narratives that are appropriate for those kind of responses. The how of it. We never really had the why. And that's what we have with causal artificial intelligence is the ability to gather data, analyze it, put it into certain shapes, run it through this new form of calculus, and get the why of what's going to happen. So soon we're going to have composite applications that will actually predict why things are going to happen, what we should do, and how we should respond. And I believe, and if no one else does it, I'm going to do it. We're going to be building applications that just run all 3 of those at the same time and come out with, okay, here's your entire pipeline of what you should be doing for this set of customers, or for this product, or for this geography, or whatever phenomena or group you're trying to address.
Absolutely. And so many people take this for granted, the power of generative AI. Like you mentioned, generative AI can have that context on how to speak to, in your words, like either a high schooler, a teenage girl, or a senior citizen, or a young professional adult in their career with a background in economics and finance, something along those lines. So how does generative AI get all that context?
It's really a great question, John. And we've been my day job is I'm the global head of AI for EY, and we've been banging on this for 8 months now. And we made all sorts of errors, of course, but we've made great progress in being able to bring together different kinds of unstructured information, embed it, index it, structure it, store it, and have it work, around the large language models to help ground it. So, you can put in any kind of context that you want. I was working with a group of people the other day, and they were asking questions of a large language model. And the questions were almost the same things you'd ask of a search engine. What's the capital of Georgia? What's the capital of Azerbaijan? And who was the president in 1862? And I was thinking, how do I get past this? How do I get past this just view that I'm working with a search engine on steroids? So I said, okay, I'm gonna do a scenario. So I typed into the chat window. I said, all subsequent responses, I want you to respond as if you were Vito Corleone's character in The Godfather. So I didn't say Marlon Brando. It had to deduce what those speech patterns were and what that cadence was, and how the didactic speech would go. And then I started asking it all sorts of questions. What is the best way to penetrate a market in fruit or olive oil? I tried to keep with the Godfather theme there. What is the best way to eradicate competition in a certain market? And it answered just as if it were Marlon Brando. So what I was trying to get to people is that you can do things that are simple, you can do things that are interesting, you can put context, you can make these models do all sorts of interesting things. The real question is, how creative do you want to be? How specific do you want to program that model with your language? And you could see the light bulbs going on all over the room, and people were doing all sorts of interesting things with it after that.
Yeah, it's very powerful, and I even love the how precise it can be. Like, to know that when you say talk like Don Corleone in The Godfather, it knows that you probably mean like Marlon Brando's interpretation and delivery of that role, right? Not the one in the book.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's so powerful and so aware of that, the human intention of the prompts.
Hmm.
Now, at the same time, I've heard the term, AI can hallucinate. If with wrong information, it can go down a rabbit hole of just, of hallucination, just completely BSing you. How do you prevent that from happening?
Yeah, John, that's a real issue. And we found through some of our research that, the models we were working with, if they couldn't get out to the internet to reach the link that we were providing, it would take the components of the link and just hallucinate a story from it. So we started creating totally fictitious URLs that were really long, that had all sorts of stuff in them. And it would take the parts of that and write a story. And it was really funny to watch. It's like, okay, this is a real problem. So, there's a number of different approaches that are out there today, and we've been working with a wide range of them. So retrieval augmented generation is becoming very popular. People are understanding that the whole one of the main purposes of RAG, as it's referred to often, is to ground the model, to ground the responses, and to bring back greater relevancy, better accuracy, less hallucination. So retrieval augmented generation is one way to do it. Programmatically augmented large language models, we've done this and it works out very well in grounding the model. And then function calling, where you can actually take a model and run it, maybe a RAG environment, run it, bring the response back, use that response to stimulate a different system, maybe an SAP ERP system or a CRM system, get a response back. So, and then you can use libraries and all sorts of other things as well. But what you're doing is you're building a constellation of functions around that model that ground it, that bring it back to reality. And as I said, increase accuracy, relevancy, and reduce hallucinations. So it's really nothing more than what we've historically done in information management. It's just a different architecture.
Very cool, very cool. And and we've heard the term RAG and the benefit and the purpose of it, as you mentioned, but can you tell us a bit about how it works?
Sure, absolutely. So, we talk about, tuning a model or training a model, and that's what OpenAI and Cohere and Anthropic, they train their models. And we get those models and we can open them up and fine tune them. But generally, not too many people are doing that right now. We'll do more of that in the future. But RAG is really the ability to bring in unstructured information, run it through an indexer like Llama Index or LangChain or something like that. Build embeddings and vectors so you have all the different unstructured information aligned and into compact representations, and then take and you don't have to do this. You can take the entire corpus of documents that you've brought in and indexed and put it in blob storage. Now, there's a number of ways you can run these queries, but usually what happens is you run the queries into the indexed information in the embeddings. You bring out the top 3, 5, 10 hits that you've got. You run that through the large language model. It generates a narrative. And then if you need citations, you can run it through the blob storage and get the citations. And then you bring the whole thing back. So you're using your corpus of information indexed in a way to get relevant hits, in your search. You run it through the model to get the narrative. You run it through the blob storage to get the citations, and then you bring the whole thing out to the user.
Very cool. And I think these are all the components that, people are just starting to familiarize themselves with, as they start their AI journey. Now you're an implementer, right? You have another very unique perspective on what you're building now. And I don't know how much detail you can get into, but if you can, share exactly your approach to building out production generative AI and artificial intelligence in general, that would also be great.
Yeah, I am an implementer. I am a practitioner, which I'm very proud of. I really like to solve real world problems and use this technology in a way that makes a difference for people. My day job is to build the infrastructure of all three pillars of AI for EY. We have been focused most recently on generative AI, and we've built a scalable, robust infrastructure for all 400,000 EY employees. So we have a private secure chat feature that people are using on a daily basis. We have a sandbox that allows people to do experimentation, and we have a proof of concept environment that allows people to build applications in a secure, governed way. So, we've built this entire infrastructure over the last few months, and we have, hundreds of thousands of people on it every day banging away. So, we went out there and did it. We thought, well, there's not really many people that can help us because we're kind of on the bleeding leading edge. So we just dove into it. And as I said, we made mistakes. We went down blind alleys, but we did it quickly. We learned fast and we stood it up, and we're quite proud of what we've got.
Excellent. And, I love speaking to people who've done AI before. We've had some previous guests on the show who either did it at Facebook or places like Lyft, and it's not only just like, hey, deploying the AI and making sure that it's not just about deploying the AI and talking about the technology benefits, and there's so many and there's so much ROI you can get out of AI, but it's also avoiding the pitfalls. So what are some of the main pitfalls of AI and how do you avoid them?
Yeah, almost each pillar has its own pitfalls. There's no doubt about it. Traditional AI, I think some of the biggest pitfalls are not getting executive buy-in. It's not really even technology. It's not getting the organization to understand that if you take this journey and you make this investment, you're going to have to change how you do business. It just doesn't work if you don't use the results. I mean, if Uber and Lyft and when it did all this work on understanding the distance between drivers and riders, and then the company said they're not going to implement it, I mean, what's the point? There's no sense in that. So traditional AI is usually the pitfall is cultural. With generative AI, what we found some of the biggest issues, the biggest stumbling block is inaccurate or out of date content. Because we're taking a lot of content that hasn't been looked at in quite some time. And some of it has been looked at recently, but it just hasn't been, I guess, reviewed or, quality checked or whatever. So we put the content into a Gen AI environment, we start querying it, and people come back and say, oh, well, the model's wrong. That answer's wrong, or that answer's wrong. And what we found is 90% of the time it's the content is wrong. So we go back and say, okay, well, let's go back and review the content. Let's take out everything that we did, get rid of that, review the content, get the quality content, put it in, ensure that the models are working, and then, go forward with a content upgrade process. And then for causal AI, what we've seen so far, the pitfalls are it's hard to understand. We haven't gotten to a point where there are great software packages that are easy to use. Most of the software out there is developer facing, and trying to understand how to do a directed acyclic graph that accurately represents the world you're trying to model is challenging. So, we've got cultural, we've got data, and we've got technology. So those are the pitfalls I see in those three pillars.
Yeah, I love the comprehensive overview because even if you get like you were saying, if you get past the technical hurdles, if you don't have executive buy-in, you don't have other business groups really using it, then it's wasteful and ultimately you won't get ROI, return on investment, out of it.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's such a good area to dive into. On the technology side, how do you make sure that AI is making, correct decisions? Like how are you continuously testing model fit, for instance?
Yeah, we've been working on, the work at EY predates me. I think I mentioned, I've been at EY almost a year now, and the work on responsible AI has been going on for a couple years. And we're now moving into a phase of where we're taking responsible, ethical, transparent AI and turning it into code. So, soon we'll be able to have a rigorous, comprehensive testing regime that's linked to the laws and regulations and compliance metrics of a specific industry, a specific country, a specific state. So what we're doing is we're doing statistical testing on models to make sure that they're not drifting or breaching certain levels, either above or below where they're supposed to be, or left or right out of a box. So we're working on that, and that's obviously very proprietary and confidential. And then we're working with external bodies on what they think is responsible AI, universities, research organizations, universities around the world, and research institutes around the world as well. And we're trying to distill that down so we can not only have it in artifacts that we use in consulting and professional services like PowerPoint decks and processes and spreadsheets and documents and things like that, but actually reducing it to code so we can really test these things in a large scale modeled environment.
Absolutely. And I think there's lots of examples of companies sort of doing set and forget with AI, which is obviously not an option. But there was one famous example where they use a forecasting model to basically dictate the prices they were going to offer some good. I'm going to keep it very broad and anonymous. But let's say they were using forecasting to set the price of something they were selling in a marketplace. And it turned out that they didn't take in, new factors such as inflation, rising interest rates, things along those lines. And this business generated hundreds of millions of dollars in losses. They ended up losing 25% of their market cap as a result of this. And these are risks, but how do you mitigate the risks on just the culture of setting and forgetting AI?
Yeah, you can't do that. Well, you can, and you just talked about the pitfalls of doing it. So, that's not a good thing. Generally, it comes down to the partnership between the modeling and the AI group, modeling AI group, and the business. That you're working in conjunction with each other. We as analytical professionals know the data, we know the algorithms, we know the applications. The business people, the subject matter experts, know their business. So, having those two groups working in conjunction with each other usually mitigates or eliminates set and forget, because someone's always asking the other group a question like, hey, we just saw interest rates go up 5 points in 2 months. We really should look at that model. Or, the business is saying, these forecasts seem a little wonky. Let's take a look. We had a great example. We were forecasting in my previous job at the biopharma company. We were predicting how many people would come into our 350 donation centers around the United States. And then in, what was it, March 2020 or 2021 or whenever it was, COVID snapped in. And, in the span of like 3 days, 4 weeks, whatever it was, our whole world changed. Our models went from an error term of about 3%, 5% to completely wacko. They were just nowhere near reality. And a lot of people in the business came to us and said, hey, these models are no good. And we said, look, the models are just fine. but they were trained in a different era, which was last month, oddly. And it took us 3 months to recalibrate the models and get them back on track, but they were fine in the COVID area. It was just a different type of velocity and volume that we were seeing. So you need a partnership is generally how I see it works best.
Excellent, excellent. I think, and you really do have that great business perspective on making sure that it's viable internally and getting the right adoption. And I think just hammering that over and over again with teams that are actually deploying AI is going to be critical for success there. Now, that segues into my next question: who should own AI? I mean, tactically from an implementation perspective within companies.
It's a great question, and there's a lot of people that like to, have a parochial view of ownership. I own it, and nobody else owns it, and it's not, it doesn't work well that way. A lot of technology should have had more of a shared ownership model than it ever did, and I think AI, in all its different flavors and pillars, is bringing that dichotomy and that breakdown in partnership in greater relief. It
Yeah.
really shows that the data teams need the analytics teams need the subject matter experts, and the executives need all three of those people working together, to reliably move the business forward. So it's not going to be that the IT group owns it, or the CIO owns it, or the CAO owns it, or the CDO, or that's not, if you can do that, absolutely, and people do implement it that way, but you're not going to get the value out of it. You're not going to be one of the leading players in your industry or in your market. It needs to be a collaboration and shared ownership. I know I sound like a one trick pony, but it's the only way it works.
And that's such a great point. And I've seen this play out at companies where, hey, should this all be in the responsibility of a chief data officer or engineering or CTO, or do we need a chief AI officer and they have their own domain experts on that topic? And ultimately, it does sound like companies will have to figure out what works best for them. However, there's going to be dependencies on the data teams, right? Because they're the ones who are ultimately building the infrastructure to move data around. So, and more of a practical question for you. So, there's teams want to use AI. There's all these third party models out there that, have been trained for years with tons of data. I don't see enterprises trying to bring that function in house of, building the models themselves. But how does an enterprise securely deploy a model in their environment with their customer data without the model actually being trained on proprietary data used for other companies?
It's a great question, and one that I answer almost daily. My job at EY is not a customer facing job. I'm building the infrastructure for the whole company. But in the last 2 months, I think I've talked to 40 customers, because this area is so hot, and I enjoy talking to customers. I don't have any issue being out front and center and talking to board members and C-level executives and, other folks that are doing their jobs. So, the, it's not, it's not any different than anything we've done before. It sounds different, but it's not. At the basics, if you do good information management processes and good architecture and good security practices, it's the same thing we've always done. You build systems that are clean, that work well, that are protected from the outside world. You encrypt data at rest and in motion, and it's the same thing that we've done forever. So it's a wild and woolly world. There's no doubt about it. And we've talked about hallucinations and all those different kind of things. But if you build the RAG architecture or the different architectures that I've talked about in the right way, they're easy to secure and they're easy to control, and they actually benefit from logical and physical separation of assets. So you actually end up with an architecture that's pretty easy to defend and protect, and it works really well.
Excellent, excellent. So it does really keep. It does sound like the knowledge of managing data securely and infrastructure securely does come back to those teams that will likely have the most leverage to implement AI within the organizations, which is those kind of cloud engineering, data engineering type teams. But augmenting it with the AI and data science type of work, but at the same time, making sure there's enough executive buy-in, right? Vehicles internally to make sure there's adoption. So, when the CFO comes and says, "Hey, I got this big cloud bill. What was the output of it?" Right? You can say, "Well, it's tied to this critical customer-facing software that we have, or this internal operation that makes sure that we're always delivering things on time, on budget." It's
Yeah.
gonna have to come down to that.
Yeah, one of the things that I learned a few decades ago is that, any kind of analytic or data warehouse, data lakehouse, AI, advanced analytics, statistics, optimization, simulation, all the different things that I've built over the years, I always bring them back to metrics that non-technical executives can understand. It's either acquisition of customers, or it's increasing eyeballs, or it's revenue or margin, or whatever they're interested in. So when they come and say, hey, we got this bill, and I say, yeah, that's tied to the 500,000 customers we attracted in the last quarter, and they go, okay, fine. you know
Yeah.
it's it's easy to make your life easy if you want to. If you look, and if you're not driving those kind of improvements in operations, then you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. You should be able to tie exactly what you're doing in data and analytics to operational metrics that people care about. If your improvement is something people don't care about, shouldn't be doing it. So, that's what I've always found, is that people go, oh, I'm having a really hard time tying all the work we've done to any kind of measurable improvement. And I say, well, it's kind of your fault, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, John K. Thompson, author, data practitioner, and leader for AI at EY. Thank you for joining today's episode of What's New in Data. Where can people follow along with you?
My social is LinkedIn.
Mhm.
John Thompson on LinkedIn. That's where I post everything. Link with me there. I'm pretty ruthless on who. I'm not a LinkedIn open networker. I'm not a lion. If you're in data and analytics and you're doing something in the field that's relevant and interesting, I'll connect with you. If you're trying to sell me a wealth generation scheme or a franchise, opportunity, then please don't. But yeah, LinkedIn is the place.
Excellent, excellent. And we'll have that link in the description for the listeners. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. Thank you again, John K. Thompson, for joining us.
Thanks, John. It was fun. I enjoyed it. Look forward to the next time.